Hello and welcome back to History's Tech, and today we are looking at the Gloster Meteor, the Allies' only jet fighter aircraft that engaged in combat during World War II. Now, while the Messerschmitt Me-262 is the more famous jet-powered aircraft of World War II, very few realize that the Allies did have their own jet-powered aircraft. And while the Meteor was not as famous as the 262, its origins and its story are an important part of jet aircraft development. Now, Whittle is credited with being the developer of the practical turbojet engine, and he actually tried to build a jet aircraft based on his engine as early as 1931. However, when it was evaluated, it wasn't seen as technically feasible, and so his idea was abandoned. After he managed to get a working prototype in 1937, he finally gained an audience with Gloster in 1939. This partnership led to the development of a proof-of-concept aircraft, the Gloster E-2839. Now, interestingly enough, even before this prototype actually flew, the British government went ahead and ordered a design for a twin-engine jet aircraft for military use. In June of 1941, the British government ordered the production of 300 of these new fighters, known then as the Thunderbolt. This name, however, would be changed to Meteor after the British accepted the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt in service in 1944, before the Meteor entered full service. Now, due to a series of production issues with the engine and various other components, the first prototype Meteor would not fly until 1943. It would take nearly a year of in-the-field development issues, swapping out engines, making adjustments, before they could actually begin full-blown production of the Meteor. Finally, in January of 1944, the first production models of the Meteor rolled off the assembly line and took to the air. Now, interestingly enough, at this point, the United States had finally finished its first jet-powered aircraft, the Bell P-59 Air Comet, and they actually exchanged aircraft at this point to discover who had the better aircraft and kind of do a mix and match on what worked and what didn't work. And in July of 1944, the now newly christened Meteor would be deployed with the RAF in the region of Kent along the coastline. And the first job of the Meteor was actually an air interceptor. And it didn't intercept enemy aircraft, it actually intercepted the V-1 flying bomb. Now, the V-1 was one of several of the V weapons developed by the Germans during World War II, and was actually a very effective long-range weapon against England. However, the Meteor proved to be a formidable counterpart to this, and was actually able to intercept 14 of these bombs by the end of the war. But as the Germans eventually switched from the V-1 to the V-2 rocket, the use for the Meteor as an interceptor against the V-1 waned, and the British government restricted the Meteors from flying over German-held territory, so they were forced to stay close to England. And the reason for this is that there was a fear that these weapons could fall into the hands of the Germans or the Soviets. So they spent most of their career flying over friendly territory, only occasionally allowed to go into kind of mixed-use territory where Allied and Germans kind of fought of the area, and they actually were formidable as a ground attack aircraft, destroying 46 German aircraft by the end of the war. And that honestly could have been the end for the Meteor as jet technology advanced into the 1950s. However, it had a really good and long service life after World War II. The second generation Meteor would be deployed at the end of the European campaign in World War II, and it was actually a much better, much more improved variant than the original Meteor, so much so that it actually would be sold to countries like Argentina, Australia, Egypt, Syria, France, and Israel. And it would go on to play major roles in the 1955 Argentinian Revolution, with the various crises that occurred over the Suez Canal, and even took place as a fighter during the Korean War for the British RAF. And would go on to have a very long career, finally being retired by the RAF in the 1980s. With all that time in service, there was of course unique variants of the Meteor. Now, most of the early variants of the Meteor basically center around its engine, various engine configurations, elongating the cowl around the engine and such. However, there was a few that were completely unconventional designs. One of these is known as the Meteor F1 Trent turboprop. This would be the world's first turboprop-powered aircraft, and they basically used a Meteor body, removed the jet engines, and replaced it with two turboprop engines. And the success of this aircraft would go on to allow the full-blown production of turboprop aircraft around the world. Another unique variant was the NF-14, which was a night fighter variant. They basically elongated the nose to allow for an interception radar to be installed. But arguably the most unique variant was the Gloster Meteor F-8 prone pilot. This unique variant was part of a series of aircraft starting in the 1940s in which the idea of switching the pilot from a seating configuration to a prone position was tested. The prone pilot idea was developed twofold. One, it rearranged the airframe in the frontal area, reducing drag, therefore allowing for a greater speed. Secondly, the laying down prone position allowed for better inertial G-force and would mean that a pilot could handle G-forces for a longer time and could potentially prevent blackout, which was starting to occur with higher speed aircraft. Eventually, the prone pilot program would be abandoned twofold. One, because of the development of special aviation clothing known as G-suits, and the fact that this basically denied the ability to look back behind you, meaning that in an air-to-air combat, you were vulnerable to an attack from the rear. The last unique variant I want to talk about, it was a one-off design known as the Gloster Meteor Reaper. This was a purpose-built ground attack aircraft that had external rocket-assisted takeoff equipment, a 57mm cannon, external wingtip tanks, and the ability to carry as many as 20 rockets. Now, because of its incredibly long career and the fact that it was sold to multiple nations, the Gloster Meteor is actually a valued museum piece with over 100 examples existing in museums around the world. Now, amazingly enough, there are actually still 4 airworthy frames in the world. 1 in the United States, 1 in Australia, and 2 in the United Kingdom. And interestingly enough, the 2 in the United Kingdom are actually the 2-seat variant and are utilized by Martin Baker to test ejection seats. But there you have it, a look at the Gloster Meteor, a rather long-lived jet aircraft with service from the 1940s into the 1980s. And while it may not be as famous as some other jet aircraft, its role in conflicts around the world and its importance to jet aviation development cannot be ignored.